Last thing for this morning, pivot tables. Pivot tables are cross-tabulation tables. If you're used to using SPSS or SAS or other stat packages, they usually call them a cross-tab table. It's the same thing. Just relax for a second. I'm going to create one really quickly, and I can show you what it is, and then we'll work from there, all right? What? Okay. That's a cross-tabulation table. You give it categories for the rows and maybe columns, and then you have some summary statistic for each cell in that table. So here I just wanted to know how many rows came from Connecticut, New Hampshire, so on and so forth, right? And it turns out there's 512 in each one. What I have here is this fake marketing database that I created. And it has the stuff that you'd find in a typical marketing database: address, phone number, email, how much the house is worth, how much income is in that household, all sorts of stuff there. When do they move into the house? Do they have cable television? All that sort of stuff you'd find in a decent marketing database. But we want to kind of summarize this data now. There's 4,600 rows in this table, by the way. So again, you know, we really need some way to summarize this, and a pivot table is the way to go. Now, the thing we really love about pivot tables is they're really flexible. You can start off with this, and if you want to add another category to it, you can, like email, domain, here, and now we can break it down by see, you know, how many people have Google as their email versus Yahoo versus whatever. I can switch these around if I want, just by clicking and dragging and dropping those things wherever I want. Maybe I like the table better this way. Okay. So I put the table this way if I was saying, is, you know, AOL more popular in one part of the country than the others? So I could set it up this way. If I was talking about, you know, whatever, I can do it. Anyway, there really is no rule about tables. Compact as possible. We generally like them longer than they are wide, but again, whatever fits your purposes, which is why this is such a great thing. You can rearrange this stuff however you want. You can add other filters. You can add filters to this. Can mail. There's a national registry called the Do Not Mail. You can put your name in it. You can go on the internet. You can find it. You can put your name in there. And then direct marketers, people who send you directed mail, which you would call junk mail. I used to work for one of these companies. Anyway, if your name's in there, by law, they're not supposed to send you anything. And in fact, if they get caught doing that, there's a fairly substantial fine. So any legitimate marketer always pays attention to that to make sure they're not sending stuff to a do not mail home. Okay. So we can add that in here as a filter if we want. I can just drop it up here. And it's a filter, just like the filters we talked about back in the table. And we can, you know, select what we want here, yes, no, do whatever we want, and it'll just show us that data. So that's what this filter up here is for. You can put it down here as part of your table if you want to have the breakdown here. So now we've got AOL, we can't mail them, AOL, we can mail them, and so on like that. And again, if you don't like it that way, you can drag it around here. Do that. You can change it to this way. This is one of the best tools you'll find for making tables like this. It's very easy to use. It's very flexible, and you can do lots of wonderful things with it. So you can play around with it and get the table looking at whatever you want. So let's take can mail out of here. I'm going to take state. We'll put state back down here and take this out of here. I'm just going to take everything out. Let's just start all over. All right. So you start off with a blank. And as you drop things in there, it starts building the table on the left so you can see what you got. So I'm going to grab state and bring it down and make that my row, like that. And then I'm going to grab home value, which is the assessed value for the home for that address. But the summary statistic it defaults to is sum. If I want something else, Like the average, I can go to that drop-down menu right next to it down there. Value field settings. And then I get this list here, and then I can pick whatever one I want. And usually it's one of these up here at the top, sum count average. And so there's my average home value by state. Now this data is all phony, so don't try to read any truth into it, which is why there's not much variation across the states in terms of average home value. But if you sort of squint and not think about it too hard, it looks like a marketing database. Okay? So we can do that sort of stuff. You can throw a second statistic in there if you wanted to. If I wanted to know how many households were in each one of those states, then I could just drop zip code in here, and it does that. So you can have more than one summary statistic for each grouping and stuff like that. Okay, so do whatever you want to do with this. What else is there to know about it? It's pretty simple to do. Again, all these will have these filters things here. The filters work here the same as before, though they're not quite as useful here as they were in the table, but they work exactly the same. And design. Okay. Now, this is not a set of cells. This is a pivot table. It might help you to think of this as being something that floats just above the surface of the cells. You can't, so if I want to modify this, I've got to do it through the ribbon. I can't insert rows or delete rows and all that sort of stuff. If I want to change the look of that table, I have to do it through the ribbon. And most of that stuff's on the design. If I want to add a bunch of color to that, you can come over here to this thing here and you can pick whatever colors you want. Okay. Whatever you think looks pleasing to the eye, pick. If you want to turn off some of the totals, well, let's put a cross thing in here again. Okay. If you wanted to turn off some of the totals, you can do that in here. And over here, you can turn off rules only and stuff like that, right? Again, if you want to modify the look of this, you have to do it through the ribbon. Banded columns, banded rows. You can do all sorts of stuff here. All right. Report layout. If you have a complex one, something like this, where I'm going to add that to that, then some of this stuff starts to make sense here. You can do this in compact form. So you can, again, change the look of it by picking some of this stuff here. Insert blank. If you want to insert some stuff, if you want to spread the table apart to make it a little bit more readable, you can do that. But in general, if you want to design it, modify the look of it, you have to do it through the ribbon. The only thing you can modify outside of the ribbon is, since these are all dollar amounts, I can just highlight those and tell it to format that as currency. Something like that. And I can get rid of the decimals like that. Okay. So you can dress this thing up however you want. Do whatever you want with it. All right. What else is on my list here? Okay. Show values. Summarize values. Show values. So, moving on. There's a slicer here. The slicer's great for this. This is where the slicer really comes into play. Now, Mac people, you're not going to see this slicer. It's not part of 2011. If the homework calls for a slicer, don't worry about it. Anyway, right here, insert slicer. So I can pick even more ways to slice the data, like pet owners. Do they own a pet? Yes, no. So that shows me the information right there. Then if I wanted to, subset it, just look at people who own pets, I can pick that. And now I'm looking at just people who own pets. I can have as many slicers as I want, so I can go through and I can use this to really pull in just the information I want to see. And I can do all sorts of fun things with the slicer in terms of analyzing my data. And what else do I have on my list here? Filters you know about, slicer, pivot chart. Oh yeah, the pivot chart. Let's make, okay. If you click on a cell in that pivot table and you don't get that field listing thing on the right hand side, then right here under Analyze, Field List brings this thing back up so that you can modify your table. Let me make this. Let's just take that out. SES. And I'm going to put pet owner in here for now. Take the pet out. Okay. All right. So now I've got back everything, and I can take that out. Like that. SES, social economic status. In a marketing database, they'll come up with a number or a code that's supposed to typify everybody in that zip code or in that census tract. So they'll have some way to distinguish rich neighborhoods from poor neighborhoods, or neighborhoods that have highly educated people versus neighborhoods that are not so educated and stuff like that. And then, so when you're doing marketing, say, look, I need people middle income that own pickups or something like that. So they'll have a whole set of zip codes across the country that have a lot of people matching that criteria. So this is usually there's about 200 categories in there. Mine's only got 9 categories, but that's what it stands for. All right. Anyway, so here's my table like that. Okay. Pivot chart. I'm going to pick this one. Okay. Now, all the things we learned last week about charting apply here. You can put titles in here. You can get rid of the grid lines. You can label the axes. You can get rid of all those zeros. All that stuff works here. But pivot charts, in addition, give you the ability to modify a chart on the fly. If I don't want to see all the states, for example, then I can just pick this filter here, and I can pick which states I want. I just want to pick, say, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. And say OK. And it changes the chart automatically. In addition, notice what it did to the table. It reduced it to that. So this is really great because remember last week I was talking about how charts are for patterns or overall impressions and not so much numbers. You can set this thing up like this so people can look at the chart, and then if they really want to see the numbers, the table's right beside it. And if they want to play around with it, you can. This link works both ways, by the way. If I were to come over here and say I wanted to add a 4th state like Massachusetts, I could do it from that filter over there. It'll update the table and it'll update the chart automatically. So it gives you a lot of capability here to look at the data, and you can look at the details, and you can look at the patterns. You can do whatever you want to do with it. Okay. Now, to move this, you can't just copy and paste it. You have to do it because it's not cell. It's not ordinary cells. It's an object. And to move an object, you have to do it through the ribbon. So under the Analyze part, move pivot table. So you just pick that, and then you just pick what sheet you want to move it to. You just go to the cell where you want to move it to, and you click on that, and then say OK, and it'll take it and copy it. And it'll move it to there. If you want to get rid of one altogether, you have to highlight everything in that table, that pivot table, and then you can just hit the delete key, and it goes away. If you ever need to get rid of a pivot table, which is why we generally throw them on a different sheet, so if we don't like it, we can just throw away the whole sheet. Last thing, and an important thing. No, I don't have one now. Oops. All right, let me make a new one here. Analyze field list. Now, okay, hold on. I got to make a new one. Start from here. Start from there. Insert pivot table. New sheet. Pull state down to here. We'll pull email domain up to there. And we'll have, for lot size, how big of a lot is that house? Okay, so here we want to do the average, something like that. Anyway, there's a table. Okay. Now, something you need to be aware of, because it can cause you a lot of grief down the line. I'm just going to pick one of these cells in here. It doesn't matter which one. And I'm just going to double click on it. Click, click. When it creates a pivot table, it makes a copy of all that data and it hides it someplace in the workbook so that you have this, and it sort of has this drill down capability. So if I want, so what I did there was when I said, okay, here's people from Maine who have Google as their email address. And if I was curious about what those people really looked like, when I double clicked on it, there's all that information. So the rows that went into that particular cell are stored in a separate spot, and I can see them again. So if I went through and clicked on each one of those cells in the table, I could recreate that entire set of data that I started with. Now that's supposed to be a good thing because it gives me this drill down capability. In fact, it turned it into a table so I can do filtering and stuff and so I can play around with it. But beware that if you pass this on to a client, if they know this trick, they can get all this data back. So if we had like names and social security numbers in here too, if we were to pass this on to somebody else, they could open this thing up and have all that information. Oops, not a good thing. Okay. So tuck this away. You don't have to worry about it in this class, but in the future, if you're out in the real world working on this, just remember that. If you don't want to pass that additional data on, you can fix it. In the table itself, you're going to go to Options, right? And then under Data, where it says Save Source Data with File, if you get rid of that, uncheck it, and say OK, then it won't store all that information behind the scenes, and it gets rid of the drill down capability. So all they can see is just this. And then it's safe to, well, then what you do is you create these things, you blow away the sheet that had the original data on it, and then you could pass this workbook on to somebody else. And you'd be nice and secure. Second reason why you might want to do this is that because it does this, every time you create a pivot table, it's copying huge amounts of data into a separate place. So if I were to create another table, another pivot table, it's going to create another copy of that data. And so your workbooks can get big very quickly. Huge. Because you're making a copy of, well, here I've got 4,600 rows by 30-some columns, I believe. So each time I make a pivot table, it's copying all that information someplace, and it gets to be very big. All right. So anyway, just so you don't get caught. And I think that's all I want to say about pivot tables. Yep. Okay. So on P4 or P3, excuse me, there's some. What did I do? I give you the same data, didn't I? Yeah. Some question answer. Each one of those questions should be answered with its own pivot table. All right, so get one done and then go back and create another. You can put all the pivot tables on the same sheet if you want, or you can put them on different sheets. I don't care. All right, so go ahead and give that a shot.